The sun bled out across the hills, turning the sky the color of old bruises. Thomas Mercer stood in the doorway of his cabin, one rough hand still on the latch, watching two silhouettes come up the rutted track. The girl walked. The boy rode behind her on a mare, so sway-backed her belly nearly scraped the dirt. The girl stopped at the bottom step. She couldn't have been more than 14, but her eyes were older than the mountains. "Can we sleep in your barn?" she asked. No plea in it. Just a flat question she had asked a dozen times before and been refused every one. Thomas should have said no. A man alone didn't open doors to strangers, not in this country still bleeding from war. But the boy on the horse was pale as ash, lips cracked, feet dangling limp. Thomas had seen that look once in a mirror, long ago, after the world had taken everything and left him breathing. "How long since you ate?" he asked. The girl's jaw tightened. "We're fine." That wasn't the question. She glanced back at her brother. Something silent passed between them. When she turned again, her face was stone. "We won't steal nothing. We'll be gone by dawn." Thomas exhaled through his nose. "Barn's full of hay bales. Gets cold. There's a room inside. Used to be my daughter's. Bed still good." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "There's stew," he added. "Still hot. You'll eat before you sleep." For the first time, the mask slipped. Her mouth opened, closed. Her fingers went white on the reins. "Why?" she whispered. Thomas stepped aside and held the door wide. "Because it's the right thing to do." The girl's name was Clara. The boy was Samuel. They sat at his table like cornered animals, tense, ready to bolt. Thomas ladled stew and set the bowls down without ceremony. "Eat slow," he warned. "Eat too fast after starving and you'll just sick it up." Clara nudged her brother. Samuel ate in silence, eyes never leaving the bowl. Thomas stayed by the stove, arms crossed, pretending not to watch. Later, he showed them the upstairs room. The quilt was faded but clean. A wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, gathering dust these past 5 years. Clara paused on the threshold. "This is too much." "It's a bed," Thomas said. "Nothing more." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a heartbeat she was just a scared child. "Thank you," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. Thomas nodded once and pulled the door shut behind him. Downstairs he loaded his rifle, set it beside his chair, and did not sleep. At first light, the bed was empty. The window stood open. On the kitchen table lay a torn brown paper. "Thank you for the food and the bed. We didn't take nothing. We won't forget your kindness." Thomas stared at the careful, shaking letters longer than he should have. Then he saddled his gelding and followed the tracks east. He found them an hour out, under a red rock outcrop. The mare stood with head hanging. Samuel lay slumped against his sister, burning with fever. Clara knelt beside him, trying to tip water between his cracked lips. When she heard hoofbeats, she snatched a little knife from her waist, stood in front of the boy, and waited to die rather than surrender him. Thomas raised both hands. "Easy. Stay back. I'm not here to hurt you." "Then why are you here?" "Because you left without saying goodbye." She almost laughed, a cracked sound. "We didn't steal nothing." "I know." He dismounted, slow. "Your brother's sick." "He's fine." "He's burning up Clara." Her face crumpled. The knife wavered. "We don't have money for a doctor." "I'm not asking for money." Thomas crouched so their eyes were level. "You're kids. You shouldn't have to do this alone." The knife fell into the dust. "Okay," she whispered, and it sounded like surrender and prayer at once. He carried Samuel home across his saddle. The boy weighed next to nothing. Clara walked beside them, one hand on her brother's ankle the whole way, as if letting go would make him vanish. Days blurred. Samuel's fever broke on the 3rd night. On the 4th he laughed, bright and sudden, when milk squirted into the pail for the first time. Clara watched from the barn doorway and smiled like it hurt. They worked side by side. Clara scrubbed dishes until her knuckles bled, trying to earn her keep. Thomas taught her to plane wood. The first shelf they built together was crooked but strong. Samuel trailed Thomas everywhere, asking questions until the silence Thomas had worn like armor cracked clean through. One evening on the porch, with Samuel asleep inside, Clara asked the question Thomas had been waiting for. Why are you really doing this? He stared at the darkening hills. I had a daughter once, about your age. He told her about the fever, the 2 small graves under the cottonwood. When his voice gave out, Clara reached over and laid her hand on his. Later, when the house was dark, she came downstairs wrapped in a blanket and found him keeping watch by the window. We're not your family, she said. No, he agreed, but maybe you could be. She crossed the room and hugged him, fierce and sudden. Thomas stiffened, then rested one careful hand on her back. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt. You don't have to thank me. Yes, she said, I do. 5 days later, a rider came up the valley road, black gelding, silver badge catching the sun. Deputy Harlan Cole asked polite questions about 2 runaways and a worried uncle offering a $100 reward. Thomas lied with a calm face. Cole smiled with a mouth that didn't match his eyes and promised a return. That night, Clara told the rest. No uncle, only a murderer who wanted her father's land. Cole was his paid dog. Thomas cleaned his rifle by lamplight. You're not running anymore, he said. We fight. Clara's eyes shone with tears and something fiercer. We fight. They came at sunrise for riders. Thomas met them on the porch with the Winchester across his chest. Words were short. Guns were shorter. Thomas dropped one man from the saddle, took a bullet in the side for his trouble. Cole's hired killer dragged Clara into the yard with iron fingers in her hair and a Colt to her head. Drop it or she dies. Thomas let the rifle fall. Cole smiled and raised the barrel to Clara's temple. The shotgun roar came from the barn. Old Jacob Miller and 3 neighbors stepped out of the dust, smoke curling from their muzzles. The fight ended quick after that. 2 days later, the marshal hauled the survivors away in chains. The uncle hanged before winter. Thomas healed slow, propped in bed, while Clara changed bandages and Samuel read aloud from tattered books in a voice that no longer whispered. 3 weeks after the shooting, Thomas stood in the workshop again. Clara Plain Oak beside him, tongue between teeth in concentration. Mr. Mercer, she said, setting the plane down, can we stay for good? He looked at her, saw the girl who had once asked to sleep in a barn, and felt the last piece inside him click into place. I think, he said, that'd be just fine. Years rolled by like seasons. The crooked shelf still hung in the kitchen. Samuel grew tall enough to rest his chin on Thomas's shoulder. Clara's hand became as sure and scarred as his own. When Thomas finally joined his wife and first daughter under the cottonwood, Clara and Samuel stood together at the grave. Wind moved through the leaves like quiet voices. People in the valley always said Thomas Mercer saved 2 orphans. Clara would touch the smooth wood of that first shelf and smile softly. No, she'd correct them. We saved each other. And the porch light burned warm against the dusk, the way it was meant to all along.